I'm Deep.
I'm Jose.
We're your token theater friends, people who love theater so much that they show up in matching outfits.
Did you just shock me? Did you feel that? And we also shock each other.
Wait, and we also shock each other. Wait.
No, that hurts. Anyway.
Love is pain, and so is the theater sometimes.
Okay. Today we're talking to Alice Yorke of Lightning Rod Special about their new show called The Appointment, running in New York at New York Theater Workshop Next Door. We talked to Alice about how you can make abortion funny and what it means to the group to have a show like this being shown to people who maybe are pro-life, pro-choice, and what that means, also the artistry, and as usual, what she had to say is much more interesting than what we're saying right now, so let's just go check out the interview. Alice, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
For the people who haven't seen The Appointment yet, can you describe what the show is?
Sure. So The Appointment is a musical satire of the hypocrisy, absurdity, and misogyny in the American abortion debate. That's the quick and dirty.
I love how much humor there is in the show because, I was like, oh God, this sounds like it's going to be dark. And it has its dark moments, obviously. But I love in the script, for instance, there's this nuance that made me think of Romanian cinema and how it shows us like real life and how you find humor in the daily.
Yeah.
So why was it important for you to have that in the show?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm really interested in satire and in seeing if humor and provocation can have a place in serious issues. And I think they do, because I think especially in an issue like abortion, where you sort of know how you feel, or probably know how you, maybe think you know how you feel. It's easy to get quite set in that. And so I wanted to do something that was gonna be a little bit jostling and a little unexpected, because I think that sort of jostling can help you shift maybe a little bit and have a different perspective on a thing that you thought you already knew about. And yeah, just like you said, abortion isn't a topic that most people think of finding humor in. But, like other medical procedures, there is, or there can be.
Well, there's something darkly funny about a bunch of men telling women that they
can't. Oh my God.
have abortion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, for this piece, you all have been doing it, researching it for 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? And so, what kind of work did you do at abortion clinics to research for it?
Yeah. So I got connected in Philadelphia with a few different organizations. One group is a funding organization. They help connect people in need, people who are needing abortion care but can't afford it, with funds. So I got connected with them, and they let me come into their office and listen in on their helplines. And they told me about the stories that people who call them tell, and the way that their system works. Why do we need abortion funds to begin with? How do they figure out how much money to give? How much money do procedures cost? And they also gave me a ton of research materials, like books and DVDs and websites, and they also then connected me with an independent clinic in Philly. So then I got to go into this clinic and observe their office. Both what does it look like in the waiting room, and I got to sit in their break room and listen to the conversations the nurses and physicians assistants have. But then I also got to shadow patients. So I got to sit in with a patient in her advocacy session, which is a time where the clinic and the patient get to talk to each other and say, this is what the procedure is like. Do you have questions? More than medical questions, do you have emotional questions? Do you want a squeeze ball? Do you get nauseous? Would you like some lavender or something to smell? Who's gonna drive you home? Are you gonna go get lunch afterwards? It's both a chance to get making sure that somebody is like mentally prepared, and also a chance to say like, here's what's going on. So I got to watch a few patient advocacy sessions, and then I got connected with a patient who let me shadow her whole day in the clinic. So we would sit together in the waiting room, and I got to watch her advocacy session, and then more sitting in the waiting room, and then paying, sitting in the waiting room, more waiting, and then eventually like getting an ultrasound and getting her procedure. And so then I got, that experience was really important because many of the scenes in the show are written based directly on those observations around like what happens in the waiting room, what happens when you get an ultrasound, what does the doctor have to tell you legally, and then what happens ultimately when you get an abortion. So I got connected with a few different local clinics back in Philly to see what are some of the nuances at different clinics, but then also like what are the overarching things that remain pretty well the same.
Right.
Was there a moment when you were doing your research, maybe you noticed a rhythm in how the nurses maybe moved in the clinic, or the way people talked and the way their body moved, that you went, this is my entry point to how I want to write the show?
Totally. Yeah, I like looking at like how people move in time. Like even when I was a kid, I remember taking a test and being like, look, 3 people just got up to use the pencil sharpener. Like boom, 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 boom. I don't know, I just always was like totally obsessed with those like measures, you know, like in a waiting room, somebody flips a magazine at the same time that somebody is like scratching their arm. So I was definitely watching for those things. But one of the things that was most sort of vibrant like that was I was in one of the hallways, and it was maybe December. I think it was December, and there were Christmas music playing on the. There was like piped in Christmas music and a little Christmas tree with condoms on it and like birth control pills on it. I was like, oh man, this is so good because it's so everyday. Like your eye doctor has a Christmas tree with glasses on it, and your physical therapist is playing Christmas music. Like every doctor's office you go to it has that kind of thing. So that was a moment for me when I was like, oh, it's just normal. It's just normal. And
It takes 5 minutes.
it takes 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And one of the other things I was watching is that like I saw a doctor say like, and you'll be in this room for 5 minutes. I was like, oh, they're emphasizing with their words and this one gesture of like 5 minutes. And so now that's in the show. Yeah.
I feel like with the American abortion debate, especially, you know, in the past couple of months, like it's either you either have one extreme where one side just lies and says they want to kill babies when they're born, and the other side not saying anything at all about it, or just couching it as, you know, women's health issue.
Yeah.
And so and the research for this, like what have you noticed that should be talked about that no one's talking about?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, one of the things that's going on, I think you bring up a really great point, which is that like the pro-life side has really good rhetoric, good like fanatic rhetoric in killing babies. And that like nobody wants to kill babies. That's incredibly difficult to argue with. And so there's a shift happening in the abortion rights movement to move away from talking about it as pro-choice, this my body, my choice rhetoric that we've used for so long, puts it as like me alone in the world. I get to make a decision for only me. And instead there's a movement toward looking at it from a perspective that acknowledges the way abortion is centered in much the way like intersectional feminism is like abortion is not a single siloed issue. It is connected to education, it's connected to race, it's connected to class, it's connected to do you have access to food, to healthcare, blah, blah, blah. There's a framework begun by women of color called reproductive justice that really centers people of color and queer people in the abortion debate, and says that those are groups who are focused on community health and looking at abortion as a part of community health and the specific impacting factors for people of color and queer people, and how that intersects with abortion care. And so that for me was a real eye-opening experience, to begin to look at abortion care as part of a larger network of social issues, and one that, I mean, hugely, disproportionately affects some groups of people more than others.
Have there been any instances where somebody in the audience came and maybe the watching the appointment made them change how they felt about abortion, and they come talk to you and they were like, thank you for...
Oh my God. We had a really incredible, I'm thinking of two experiences that we had at the run we just did in Philadelphia. We had a post-show conversation with a group of audience members, and a guy, like an older white guy, kept raising his hand and kept asking questions, and was like really very engaged, like very sat forward, was asking really nuanced questions. And finally he's like, well, I came to the show 3 days ago with my friend, and I didn't know what to expect. And I came back to see it again today because I was so turned around, and I was so jumbled, and I was so confused, and you've really got me thinking. And he just was like talking about how he hadn't stopped thinking about the show, and he'd always been in favor of abortion access as a theoretical idea. He was like, yes, of course. But from watching the show and hearing people talk about it and him doing his own processing, he talked about beginning to feel like he really understood and had some more empathy for the issue and for people who are going through that decision. And we were having a conversation with Allentown Women's Center, which is a clinic just north of Philadelphia. And he was like, I live in Allentown. I live like 5 blocks away from you. And then connected with the people from the clinic afterwards and signed up to volunteer with them, which was so huge. And then I'm thinking about another person as well who came up to me after the show and sent me an email later and just said, you made me feel less alone. This show made me feel less alone. And those two experiences were like, oh, that's all you can hope for when you make art.
Thank you for sharing. That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
So, Lightning Rod Special. You helped found the company, and it's based in Philadelphia. And you all have come. This is your second time in New York with a show. The first being, Underground Railroad Game, which won an Obie. So we're very excited to welcome you here again. But tell us about how you founded the company and why.
Yeah. So I founded the company with Scott Shepard, Mason Rosenthal, Katie Gould, and Jen Kidwell. And some of us were in the Pig Iron School in Philadelphia together. And so we were part of the first class of students way back in 2013.
So young!
So
young.
I mean, I know.
we were more naive back then.
Yeah.
It was a happier,
so many emotional
simpler
lifetimes
time.
ago. Those days, 2013. So in the shiny, bright 2012, we met and we made a show together. And we're like, oh yeah, we really liked working together. We had a really, some really shared interests in how to make theater, and we loved collaborating and the process of group writing and ensemble making, and pushing, not settling for one good idea and sort of pushing towards something that might be beyond that. And so yeah, we decided to make it a formal thing. And we made a few shows before we were like, oh, I'm starting to see a link between the work that we're making. That's the shows that we made were suddenly we were like, oh, they're all about how do we look at the world and how do we participate in the world, and using theater as a mechanism for like moving through that process of being human and like being human next to another human, more than like telling a beautiful story going from point A to point Q. That we were like realized we were more interested, that one of our shared interests was like using theater as an investigative tool. And that's, you know, among the shows that led us to Underground Railroad Game, and, you know, now to this show.
Yeah. Light fare.
Light fare.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds almost like the scientific process, though.
Yeah, that's right. That's how we talk about it. It's like
a lab.
yeah. I'm so glad. That's in all of our grant applications.
Where does the appointment go after New York City?
Oh man, I don't know yet, but I want it to go somewhere. Yeah, I hope the show has a life after this. One of the reasons we worked to bring the show here to New York was so that it could find more life after this.
It's wonderful, because even the Phantom of the Theater went to see
Yes,
it.
Yeah.
you do too. Come.
Yeah, I know about 5 states where you should be going
Yeah, right.
to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Alice, for joining us.
you.
And would you like to invite our viewers and our listeners also for the podcast to come
Yes.
see The Appointment?
Definitely. Thanks so much for watching and for listening, and I hope you come see The Appointment at New York Theater Workshop next door, April 18th through May 4th. You might laugh.
Yeah, they're singing fetuses.
There are.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Alice, for talking to us, and thank you, New York Theater Workshop, for hosting us. And we all loved that we looked like the French flag today, which we did not plan that, but you know, solidarity.
Wait,
Because art is important.
there was a Phantom at the theater. Phantom
Yeah.
of the Opera is in Paris, French. Wow. This is a conspiracy theory.
That was like a marathon style leap. And that's how Jose exercises. And if you want more of the two of us in your ears, we have a podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast, So Can Theater Friends, wherever you get podcasts. This week, we're reviewing What the Constitution Means to Me on Broadway, and I will tell you my story of sitting behind Steve Martin, who smelled very nice. Because that theater, even though it's Broadway, it's the size of an airplane seat.
It is very small. But go Heidi.
Yes, go ladies on Broadway. Thank you all for watching and for listening. And remember, theater's more fun when you take a friend and you match. Bye.
Au revoir.